Now, whether you like or loathe the deal that Israel has signed with Lebanon and Hezbollah, whether you think it's going to endure, whether you think it's going to last till next weekend or has been violated already, either way, it has shifted attention onto Gaza itself. And the dynamic there has changed dramatically. Some are planning for Gaza or would like to plan for Gaza to have the disengagement law ripped up, and I wonder what impact that would have. Would the Gazans who've been crying wolf for the last 20 years about being under occupation be begging for the deal back again? Who knows? Now, we're going to talk today. We're going to talk plans, corridors. We're going to talk well, who will accept what and when. What does the future hold for Gaza? What is moral and practicable when it comes to the Gaza Strip?
Welcome to the reality show. Today we're joined by Anders and Mark. Hi guys, how are you? Before I come to you, Anders, for initial thoughts, I'd just like to remind people why Israel is left with this hot potato of Gaza. So from 1948, dissolution of the British Mandate, this triple land, which is currently known as the Gaza Strip, was handed over to Egypt. After the 1967 war, the Six-Day War that Israel won, Israel effectively kept control of the whole Gaza Strip. It tried to get rid of it, give it to Egypt, but they a number of times they refused to accept it. So in 98, sorry, in 94, the Oslo Accord effectively gave the administration of the Gaza Strip to the newly formed Palestinian Authority. In 2008, so in 2005, there was the unilateral withdrawal of Israel from the Gaza Strip itself. Effectively, they handed over to the so-called Palestinian, to the Arabs in there to govern themselves, and that was the beginning of a series of power struggle, especially between Hamas and Fatah. In 2006, Fatah and Hamas won over Fatah. They started fighting. Eventually, in 2011, after killing a few hundreds of them among themselves, they kind of settled. And effectively, since then, the Gaza Strip was ruled by Hamas until, of course, October the 7th, when Israel was forced to go in and try and rescue the hostages, some of whom are still actually held in Gaza by the Gazans. So, Anders, how do you think Israel should deal with the problem with Gaza? Now the Hamas has been put on a back foot. Now it's lost the support on the north from Hezbollah because of the ceasefire. How do you think Israel should deal with the administration? Or what should Israel do with the Gaza Strip? You're muted.
Yeah, there we go. I think Israel has to face the fact that they're stuck with Gaza for the foreseeable future. And in my opinion, that is generations. Regardless of how we got here, Gaza is a strip of land with some 2 million hostile Palestinians, or not all of them are hostile, but a large majority is. And what we've seen here recently now, and these are ideas that have been floated on and off, is that, occupy Gaza and institute something that is called a voluntary migration. Now, I'm all for the first part, occupy, and I wrote an article here a couple of weeks ago about, I floated the idea of the United States of the Levant, that Israel really has to face up to the fact that they're stuck in this part of the world, and to do something constructive in the long run, they really have to embrace what we as objectivists know as individual rights, and figure out a way of gradually incorporating Palestinians in that community, just like we have about 1 million, I think, Arabs living as Israeli citizens today. Now, citizenship would obviously come way down the road. So I'm all for occupation if it's done the right way. I think it's the only solution. The other half of this equation, by the way, that is now, it's primarily promoted by the religious conservative Jews in Israel, is the voluntary migration idea, and voluntary in quotation marks. I think it's a horrible idea. There is, because, you know, if you Google it, I just looked up, and I come across a headline that said that, yeah, Israel is in talks with Congo of all countries, you know. Even if, I mean, I don't see why there would be a single Palestinian who voluntarily would like to move to Congo. I mean, nobody wants to move to Congo. And also, even if it were the case, I mean, talk about a situation where you're setting up the Palestinians for becoming martyrs for generations. I mean, we have been sympathizing with Jews for having been in the diaspora for 2,000 years. Now we're going to set up the Palestinians in a similar way. So that's a terrible idea. And the religious conservative Jews who are promoting this idea, that they're maybe marginally better than the fundamentalist Islamists, but it's only a question of degrees there. So just to wrap it up, I definitely think Israel should occupy Gaza and the West Bank, for that matter, and southern, if not all of Lebanon, and do it the right way. Now, we can get back to that. But we can get back to that. But occupation, I think, is the only way forward. Voluntary migration is a horrible idea.
Yeah. Mark, how do you feel about this idea that the conservative religious people in Israel are actually pushing for Gaza? Sorry, you're muted.
Yes. Yeah, the conservative religious folks give me the creeps anyway when they mix their conservative religion with politics, and they are a fairly scary element within Israel. But and I hate to invalidate what I just said with a but, although I think occupation is what must be done. I thought those territories should have been annexed into Israel long ago. And I think they could have taken care of educating the population and integrating them in a much better way over the last several years than any of the terrible versions of government that the Arabs have had. And we probably wouldn't have the conditions that we have today. But that said, what can you do with a very hostile population when you occupy it, which is what Israel's been accused of for decades now, even when it's not occupying territories. And you have to impose harsh rules on or take over the infrastructure of a place, of a people who resent being ruled by Jews, which is exactly what they're going to feel like. The migration is a way for them to be able to move to cultures that they are more comfortable with. The problem is, I think they've sort of ruined every house that they've ever been in. When they were in Jordan, they ruined the scenario there. The Lebanon, likewise. Egypt doesn't want. Nobody wants them. Kuwait, the same. They've been on the wrong side of every war they've ever been on. They've created hostilities within the countries that they've migrated to. So one has to wonder where. Certainly, the Congo is out of the question, but where will they be able to go where they have a similar culture and a similar something akin to what they experience now that they will be comfortable living in. And but do you have a choice? I mean, occupying a country of 2 million hostiles who have not reformed, you do not accept your ideology, you do not accept democratic norms, is going to be an incredibly difficult proposition, as much as I agree with it, without taking some of those bad elements out and letting the good elements remain and, start their own community. I mean, what say you about this? This seems, look, they've gotten themselves into a total clusterfuck where I think almost any decision they make is going to be highly unpleasant and going to carry with it massive negatives.
And not only that, it's going to struggle to get agreement in very large part from anyone because the ideas are too opposite to each other to satisfy so many different parties. And when you consider all the parties involved, not just within the Israeli government, but the neighboring countries such as Egypt, you've got the US administration passing the baton from one administration to the next, or one ticking hot potato to the next. And you've also got Hamas, the Gazans. You've got who is going to represent that particular region, and who else needs to be involved, if anyone, to manage it. So those are complex. It's a complex set of threads that we have to explore, isn't it? For sure.
I mean, I feel like when we occupied Germany, when we occupied Japan, there were of course fringe elements that were out there that were fighting still a guerrilla war against us. But for the most part, Japan accepted unconditional surrender and were prepared to accept the conditions that we laid on them. And in the same, I think, was mostly the case in Germany. We don't have that case with the occupation now. So it's not even like we have premises that we can share with the 2 million people that are going to be there. If they surrender, then there is that possibility because they've shown by surrender that they embrace now the possibility of democratic norms, civilization, due process, separation of church and state, things that I don't think quite exists in Israel, but they're a little bit more merged in that sense, or more or less a secular rule of law. They have to accept those premises in order for the occupation to work. Otherwise, it's going to be a constant drain on the resources of Israel. And migration might be the only other solution, as horrible as that sounds.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, isn't it? Because Hamas and Gazans will never surrender unconditionally. We will never be in the position where they actually recognize, okay, we're beaten, we're wrong, we submit effectively. And the only similar plan, as you mentioned, Mark, was actually the occupation of Japan, where you take the whole culture, reform it, reshape it, and make it one on the most one of the best productive society that we have as alive right now. But you cannot do that with Gaza, can you? We've seen the kind of damage that 20 years of UNRWA education has done, 20 years of funding from Iran for the production of weapons and all this kind of stuff. So that doesn't seem at all a feasible option, unfortunately.
And I think one of the difficulties I find is trying to get a hold on what even the Israeli side is, what the Israeli opinion is within the government. Because on the one hand, you've got like the finance minister Smotrich, who's talking about half the population in Gaza ideally being gone within 2 years, moved on within 2 years. Whereas you got the foreign minister Gideon Sahar, who said Israel does not intend to control the lives of civilians in Gaza. Now, those two things are absolute opposite ends of the scale. So, Anders, what's your read on what is really likely to be the position from Israel, given this widespread within, the single government?
Yeah, I think it's anybody's guess, unfortunately. I think Israel now, and I mean, pretty much, at least since 1967, it has been its own worst enemy, in many ways, because of these internal factions and different ideas of what Israel should be and where it should go. And as Mark alluded to, if they hadn't given up Gaza in 2005 to Hamas, and we would probably have been in a much better position now. And then that has happened over and over again. So they are definitely their own worst enemy. I mean, Israel is an outpost of Western civilization, and that is why I support Israel, and because I know that if Israel falls, that will not be the end of it. We, the U.S., we are the big Satan, so we will be constantly threatened by fundamentalist Islam until it is taken care of once and for all. But so Israel, being its own worst enemy, I don't know. I mean, it's a welfare state. It has mixed premises. So as much, I mean, I share Mark's concerns about, and you, Richard and Marco, about the realism of the project, but you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And if Israel can muster the confidence and the resolve, I think an occupation scenario can be thought out where yes, it's a population that is very hostile, and we're talking about a multi-generational approach here. But if you implemented property rights, you let the Palestinians own their property, start businesses, and go about their lives and start building wealth and just digging themselves out of the hole that they have put themselves in. Over time, I mean, sentiments will hopefully change, but will take a long time. I mean, if you talk about Japan, you can argue that even today, I mean, Japan, under the surface, it's a highly collectivist country. It's very nationalistic. They don't want any immigrants. And, so in a way, what we did back in 45 and what they have subjected themselves to some extent is that they have put a lid on a lot of that. It could probably pop up again and start fermenting. But still, even with that risk, it has been a fantastic success. And I think over a couple of generations, I don't see why you couldn't create a similar situation with a Gaza integrated into some kind of political entity in that corner of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anders. I just want to come to our early super chatters. We've got a super chat from Kathy Cascio, who says, "I'm very grateful for this channel and content." Thank you, Kathy, as are we, for your super chat. And from PC as well, who says, "No state of Palestine will work." Yeah, I totally agree. And PC also adds, all they want is no Israel. That's the Palestinian goal. And that is the problem, and that is the necessity for Israel to remain fully engaged in the management of Gaza. Now, one of the things that is tricky to understand when you're looking at this is obviously the critics of Israel are legion, but when you're looking at what the plans are for the future of Gaza, you're looking at a combination of the military setup right now in terms of creating some of these corridors. There's one corridor supposedly across the middle that's being created at the moment called the Netzarim corridor. Now, some of that might be simply to allow troops to move and to manage the zones of Gaza in the interim. But of course, that does give succor to those who criticize Israel straight out the gate and accuse it of trying to occupy and control absolutely everything in a way that they find unacceptable. So how much does Israel, I'll come to you, Mark, how much does Israel need to speak with one clear voice right now as to what its intentions are and how it's going to implement them, given that the vagueness, the variety of opinion, and the fog of not making yourself clear allows those critics a lot of leeway to add to the noise?
I think it's vital that they're morally consistent, and it's hard for them to do so long as they keep looking to the international community as a barometer of whether or not they're good, as a standard as to whether or not they're fighting the war in a moral fashion. They have to look to themselves. Of course, I think they have to dump altruism, which is extremely difficult for them to do given their moral premises. That would certainly help them to understand that their reasoned self-interest will take them further towards their goal, which should be the elimination of this enemy entirely. And they should, try to get some unanimity and moral consistency with respect to what the right thing to do is here is appropriate. Now, the right thing to do, they still haven't done yet, which is the total elimination of Hamas. the right thing to do is to not consider civilian casualties relevant in the war, but the surrender of Hamas as the most relevant goal. They are not going to do that, and so long as they hold those moral premises that keep them in check and restrain them from using the fullest amount of force possible in order to get rid of Hamas, in order to prove to the Palestinian people that this ideology is fruitless, it leads to death, destruction, poverty, starvation, all the things that most people would like to avoid, until, then we're going to have this clusterfuck of situations where we're trying to marry paradoxes and impossible scenarios. Now, Anders may be right, and if they occupy and they take over the infrastructure and the educational system, kick out UNRWA, kick out Hamas from any capacity to rule or indoctrinate the population, and start re-educating them and reforming them and giving property rights to those people who, either take some oath of loyalty or nonviolence oath, or have proven that they are productive members of the community. Perhaps over time, in a few generations, that attitude will saturate the rest of Gaza, and those who are not satisfied with that can move out voluntarily on their own to a country that makes them feel more comfortable. Where stonings and beating women for not wearing hijabs is commonplace. Yeah, perhaps, but unanimity is definitely, consistency is definitely something they need, and I don't know if they will ever be able to achieve it, given the type of government they have and given the type of paradoxical scenarios Israel has to marry in order to maintain its Jewish character, right? I mean, to maintain its Jewish character, there's religious aspects and secular aspects that they have to try to marry together, and they're incompatible, in my view. So I don't know how it's going to be done.
Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? Because, for example, the Egyptian president Al-Sisi has made it very, very clear he doesn't want refugees from Gaza. So those people will have to be kept there and reformed as human beings. And my fear is that even if Israel, by pure miracle, found this kind of egoistic approach to it by making sure Gaza is no longer a threat, the international community will do everything they can to stop them, everything that they've been doing until now to make sure that Israel doesn't succeed. So yes, it would be nice if Israel had the self-esteem and the courage to go into Gaza and say, okay, guys, now this is how we behave in a civilized society. You're going to be reformed, like it or not. In 20 years' time, you're going to be better people, and we're not going to let you go. And of course, it's a massive commitment from Israel. But to be honest, that's the best investment in the long term you can do, because we've seen already, for example, today there was a terrorist attack in the West Bank by a Hamas operative, terrorist, who gunned down 8 people in a bus. The problem here is that the Hamas people are probably regrouping the West End, West Bank, where there is a massive support for Hamas. The Palestinian Authority is seen as too weak, too kind, too gentle. They want the kind of Hamas behavior, the kind of October 7 activity that we've seen, the kind of horrors that they are pushing for, that their culture is pushing for. So, in a way, until you deal with the underlying problem, which is the ideology that fuels this kind of violence from the Arab population, you're never going to even be able to start talking about reforming the people in Gaza. And to do that, I think we'll have to deal. We'll have to deal, because it's not just Israel's problem. We'll have to deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is always under there, fueling the fire, making sure that enough hate and money is sent to this terrorist organization to make sure a final peace solution is never achieved. So, Anders, I don't know, do you think that dealing with Iran, effectively cutting the route to the evil for this kind of organization, these terrorist groups that are active in the Middle East, would be even a possibility? I mean, given how everybody seems to be pushing for ceasefires.
I mean, it's certainly possible in terms of, the scope of the task. I don't think it would be a huge effort to take out the strategic military installations and Iran's oil-producing capabilities. Iran is a very weak country. Will it happen? Your guess is as good as mine. I had hoped that we would see a little bit more after Israel's activity, and maybe they're just sitting and waiting for a change of administration here in the US. I don't know. But obviously, Iran is taking out Iran's capabilities and must be part of the ultimate goal here to destroy Islamic fundamentalist terrorism anywhere. But then back to Gaza, and to the example or the most recent Hamas terrorist attack you mentioned yesterday, is I don't think occupying Gaza alone and leaving the West Bank where it is, that won't work. I mean, this is a bigger project, unfortunately. This is Gaza and the West Bank as a minimum. And as I mentioned earlier, probably parts of southern Lebanon too. What is the realism of this? It's probably pretty low, but I think that is where you would have to go if you wanted to create lasting peace in the region at some point or another.
Mark, I've read, I think today or yesterday, that effectively Iran is doubling down on the production of uranium. Effectively, is saying that he's increasing the amount of machinery that is deploying in order to get to the point where they can create a nuclear bomb. Do you think this is just a them positioning in terms of, they see Trump coming up, so they want to cut a deal with him, so they are up in the ante now, so they can then say, okay, we scale back what we threatened to do? Or do you think it's actually a real threat that Iran is actually preparing for?
Well, it's difficult to say because the one great thing that this war has done is expose Iran as a total paper tiger. If anybody thought they were a formidable military force in the Middle East, that delusion has been shattered by Israel's capacity to take them out at the knees within hours, to completely decimate their capacity to function as a military power quite quickly. So yeah, Iran is going to flex its muscles in an attempt to gain back some of what it's lost in the community. I don't think they would have the capacity to do that, but I think America should take those threats very seriously and make sure that Iran knows that that will not happen, and that we ally ourselves with Israel, and we will not allow Iran to possess a nuclear weapon ever. And that means if they persist, their nuclear facilities will be destroyed. Their capacity to deliver oil to other nations will be destroyed. We'll destroy their military infrastructure, and we will seek regime change. And we will court the liberal elements of the Iranian society to assert a democratic society in Iran. Understanding that democracy doesn't mean, as George Bush thought, that a people can vote in whomever they choose, even somebody sensitive to terrorist regimes and to the desires of terrorist regimes, but to a secular government that will defend and protect individual rights as the only system of government that would be allowed over there. And if that requires a little bit of U.S. occupation in addition to it to restrain those forces over there, so be it. But it has to be decisive. The only way you end these forever wars, we've been in forever wars since 2001, because there's one, we're not naming who the bad guys really are, and two, we have this concept that war has to be governed by restraints and laws and civilization, when it's exactly the opposite of those things. It is the abandonment of those things And the only way you reestablish civilization is by the aggressor surrendering entirely, totally. That means they give up force as a means of achieving what they want. And so you have to make Iran, you have to make Hezbollah, you have to make Hamas, you have to make Islamic Jihad and Fatah. All of them have to surrender unconditionally. But to do that, you have to bring overwhelming force to bear on them, which the Israelis, contrary to what the international community has said, has not done. They haven't done it.
And if it's hard to get a read on exactly what the Iranian position is, or even the Israeli position is, then working out exactly where Hamas is at right now can be even tougher. However, there are a bunch of signals that we've been getting coming out from Hamas and from Gaza, which give you some indication, and from the players they interact with. Obviously, when Sinwar was seen off, it wasn't long after that the Hamas leadership was kicked out of Doha by Qatar. And that was obviously a telling moment, I think. And just lately, there's been reports coming out via Egypt that the Hamas will be more willing to accept the presence of the IDF in the Philadelphia corridor for a longer period of time. They call it temporary, nevertheless, but that has always been supposedly a red line for Hamas. Now, whilst I don't want to.
It's irrelevant what Hamas wants. The fact that we're dealing with them, it gives them legitimacy. It's like we're going back to the same things. These people cannot be and should never be negotiated with. They simply have to be wiped off the face of the earth. They are a cancer. They have to be removed. And not so surgically. They have to be removed in a way that makes every acolyte of Hamas ideology extremely uncomfortable and even dead. That's the way it has to go. And it's not our fault that the bad guys make dislodging them and ending their bad reigns ugly. It's their fault.
Yeah, and that's a part of the tragedy, isn't it? Now even Biden is decided to effectively replace Qatar in trying and come in between Hamas and Israel, trying to find a deal, which is terrible. I mean, the guy should just go in his coffin and don't bother anyone with it. But what's even worse, that it looks like the upcoming administration is actually quite favorable to finding a deal between Israel and Hamas at this stage, which is, as you mentioned, Mark, is unthinkable. That's the worst thing you can do. Hamas has to be eradicated. Not a little piece should be left. And this, if this means moving IDF into the West Bank, well, so be it.
Now, one of the worst things about Trump is that he thinks he can make a deal with anybody, and he doesn't make distinctions between the types of people he's dealing with. And maybe that comes from his big real estate background and dealing with mob bosses, I guess, sometimes, and thinking that in his pragmatic way that, you know, you can broker a deal with these folks and get what you need to get done. But these are criminal organizations run by sociopaths and psychopaths. There is no common ground to reach with them. Their goal remains the same. They're open about the fact that their goal remains the same, which is the annihilation of Israel. And so long as that is the case, and it will be the case, that's their identity, they must go. You can't talk to them. You have to just beat them. You have to restrain them and or kill them, and until they say uncle.
Absolutely. And further to this point about quibbling over Philadelphia corridors and all of that kind of stuff, there's the key factor which remains at the top of mind for every Israeli, which is freeing the hostages. And if Hamas don't even free the hostages, then absolutely nothing has changed in terms of their position from my point of view. I can't see they've given any ground whatsoever. It's all just hot air. And that is an absolute it's not the only thing that should be done, but it's the absolute starting point before you should even move on from there. Now,
And it can't be an exchange. It can't be an exchange the way it's been in the past. These prisoner exchanges for hostages has resulted in October 7th because, you know, Yahya Sinwar was one of these guys that was handed over in one of these exchanges. It can't be an exchange. There's no negotiation with these folks. They got to turn the prisoners over and they got to stand down, surrender, and get the hell out of Dodge.
And don't you think Netanyahu should be making that point up front now that no Palestinian prisoners, you know, convicts essentially would be released at all under any deal? And
Absolutely.
I don't hear that, unfortunately. I just want to thank Ginger Clark for a generous super chat. Thank you, Ginger, who says historically, populations that deal in trade do not act on hate because they look at each other as customers, not as objects of hate. Examples would be Ephesus, now in Turkey. Thus, ruling Gaza, freeing them to trade, might work. Now, I absolutely agree with your core point there, Ginger. It's very hard to see where we are now and where Gaza is now, how you get to a point of trade, even if that is a long-term goal. I mean, what are your thoughts on that particular aspect, Anders?
Well, I agree with it, and when I said earlier that, find a way of occupying Gaza and then introduce civilization, restore property rights to the extent that they have been in place in the past there, and just appeal to these people's self-interest. These people are human beings, they're self-interested, and if you can, steer them away from this focus on others being Israel, and push them into the sea. It's a slow process, I grant you that. It will take a long time. But when people have a chance to go about their own business, they start to make money, they start to get jobs that, they can feed their families, and they see a future for their children and themselves. I mean, that we shouldn't underestimate that. That is a very powerful motivation for anybody everywhere among the 8 billion people on this earth. Yeah, there are some people who are crooks, but the vast majority of these Palestinians, and we can see it, we have the Palestinian diaspora. There are a lot of productive, successful Palestinian people or of Palestinian heritage here in the United States. I'm sure you have them in the UK as well. If they're just given the right environment, that those are the human traits that will start to flourish and eventually take over. And yes, when we trade with one another, that's the most powerful force for peace that we know.
And in terms of the comparison that was being made earlier with Japan, for example, I mean, you were making this point, Mark, but I think one of the things that people tend to forget about Japan after the Second World War, and when the US were overseeing their transition to the country they are now, to the civilized country they are now, that it took a good number of years, and you're talking a decade plus, really, to get to a point when they can gradually withdraw from certain areas and hand over. And yet there seems to be no appreciation for the fact that things won't happen instantly. I mean, if you look at the Lebanon, for example, the second the ceasefire deal is signed, Lebanese people are returning to the south, and already the IDF are seemingly a little on the back foot at how quickly people have returned to the area, and the difficulties of ensuring even the early part of a transition. So how do you think that you impress on people the fact that this is not something that will be solved overnight, but that doesn't mean necessarily that we're talking occupation forever, because there's this inability to see that it is a transitionary period that can't be done instantly?
Well, I mean, the most vocal people in this argument are never going to understand that fact, because they come from a perspective, the anti-colonialist, anti-occupation perspective, and they've been so deeply indoctrinated into that colonialism is an evil, and occupation in and of itself is an evil, and that somehow the Palestinians have a right to exist and have a state, irrespective of their orientation to their own people or what that state represents. Those people are never going to be convinced that, an Israeli occupation where they take over the infrastructure, re-educate people, and introduce democratic norms into the region, introduce property rights, individual rights, and trade, that could have a positive effect. These people are fundamentally against those values to begin with, so they're not going to be convinced. If Israel does something like this, it can't be with the hope of convincing any of the opposition. because they're entrenched. All they could hope is that the Palestinian people on the ground get to see concrete results from the shift in values, and that, you know, incoming wealth and prosperity, opening the area up to tourism and bringing people in and integrating the people of the world with that group of folks, opens them up and enables them to see that, well, the results of this are certainly better than the results of the other ideology, and maybe we should change. I mean, we tried to take me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought something like that was attempted in China. You know, free market reforms were brought in. The Chinese population started to grow out of poverty, and it became wealthier and dynamic. But then Xi Jinping decided that he needed to control the Communist Party a little bit more tightly and started reinstituting more controls. And now the economy is more or less in a basic free fall. So unless there's fundamental changes in the philosophy of the people there, which we hope that, you know, trade can sort of influence, I don't envision this being a very successful adventure.
And that, in a way, I was saying that's why Israel has to put lots of effort into making sure Gaza doesn't go back to what it was, because we know that freedom is the necessary condition for humans in order to thrive. But freedom doesn't come, you know, like a weather event. You have to fight for it. You have to continuously making sure that it's not under attack. And I mean, we are failing in the West, or, you know, if you leave the Gazans to it, they're not going to last a week. And especially we've seen how quickly institutions like UNRWA and that kind of stuff is infiltrated by bad actors. It's not going to be long if you just leave them to themselves to before they, you know, restock and restart exactly what they did before October 7. And that would result in another October 7, not least because their leadership had already made it clear that's what they want. And when you have people in Lebanon, for example, like Hezbollah MPs in the Lebanese parliament who are saying we should support protesters in the West just to make our cause part of their culture, effectively make them feel, put our cause in their heart. I mean, with the scandal rhetoric, you'll never be able to leave the Gazans on their own, or even under the control or administration of somebody like Saudi Arabia, for example, which is by no means not a friend, or let alone people like you know, the usual suspects, the UN people, who will turn Gaza back in the war machine that they was until a few months ago.
Now, before you get to Ginger's point about trade, there is a key condition that needs to exist before that, which is a simple state of law and order, isn't there? And at the moment, from what I can see of the reports that have been coming out, there's been an explosion of criminality based on the fact that you know, some of the aid has been relentlessly stolen, not just systematically stolen by Hamas, as it's been since time immemorial, but I mean by sets of rival gangs. And you've got, I've heard about Gazan criminal families trying to take control of different areas, and mafias against mafias, and the kind of thing that you would expect in a lawless place when law and order breaks down. And one of the solutions proposed to that, or one of the things that's been put on the table, is American private contractors helping to you know, manage where that aid goes, to protect that aid, and to ensure that it reaches the right kind of people during the process of rebuilding Gaza. Now, Anders, how plausible do you think that is? And what are the pitfalls of getting American private contractors involved here? Is that in any way a solution, or is that just another target for terrorism?
Well, I would say that I'm very hesitant to that kind of solution, and regardless of whether American contractors would get involved or not, it's just a band-aid. You know, as long as these international aid organizations who are basically pro-Palestinian are in place, we will continue to see the mess. And it goes back to occupation. You know, Israel has to go in and establish law and order in this area. And I mean, we're not talking about a huge area. Please remember that I don't know how many square miles it is, but it is tiny. And Israel just has to, you know, fiercely guard the border to Egypt, the Philadelphia corridor there, to make sure that it's only legitimate goods that are coming across there. And then inside Gaza, you say there are criminal families and such. Yeah, you have to establish law and order. And I don't see that anybody other than Israel can establish that law and order, because everybody else, you'll get into political conflicts and people with different ideas of how it should be done. So I don't think American contractors would help, and I fear that could escalate in a way that we don't want, and the US government would get involved in a way that we don't want as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Anders. You have to establish a monopoly government there, monopoly force, consistent rules of law and order. Israel could do that. They have to knock out the gangs. They have to take out Hezbollah. They have to take out their competitors. Those people are basically competitors for governing institutions, as would happen in any bad anarchist utopia. This is an anarchist utopia forming here now. They have to form a monopoly government and enforce those rules, and that would mean going in and knocking out these criminal organizations fully, knocking them out, and that includes Hezbollah, which should never, ever raise its ugly head again in the political world. It should be banned as a party. It should be banned as a political force. And any activity it does should be seen as criminal, and the people who engage in it will be summarily dealt with by the justice system of that Israel imposes on Gaza. And I think that over time we could start to see the effects of it. It's just I just see Gaza as such a toxic society, even more toxified than imperialist Japan, and Nazi Germany. I mean, there's generation after generation of bred with terrible indoctrination, awful ideas, and a narrative that has just kept them perpetually enraged. And it's hard to see a way around that once Israel starts to occupy the area. I don't see it being tamed, but perhaps, these benevolent institutions, the knocking out of bad actors and the reinstitution of trade, maybe that can get through to them. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I share that sentiment, but I just don't see any other solution. It will be hard. It will take a long time, but to me, that's the only path forward.
Yeah, and then again, that's the best investment that Israel can make, because that's the only way you're going to guarantee you're not going to have October 7 repeated, ad nauseum. Because again, they can't even afford just to be light touch about it, because you don't want to have a puppet state, the same as Lebanon, which is going to be taken up by any terrorist organization that comes along, and it's going to happen. We know what the nation of these people is, so they're going to do that. But at the same time, they're human beings, so they can change. They can be thought to choose a different way. They can be shown that there is a better way. I mean, Ginger was talking about trade. That area historically, Phoenicians and all those areas were strong on trade thousands of years ago.
Yeah, it has a very rich tradition, and I mean, you don't have to go very far back. Just look at Beirut 50 years ago. It was the pearl of the Middle East. It was the Paris of the Middle East. I mean, it was the envy of the Arab world at the time, and so there is certainly, and I don't know how different Palestinian culture and expression is compared to the uh, melting pot that Lebanon is in terms of the different religions, different peoples, and things like that in that little area. But I mean, Lebanon certainly has the potential to come back again if we can just rid them of the Islamist fundamentalist elements.
Yeah, really just.
And so much of that comes from education, doesn't it? And I think one of the key elements that they're going to have to do is to ensure that the education is closely monitored from here on out. You almost sort of need, I don't know, a webcam in every classroom to ensure not just what the textbooks have been changed to, but what's being taught to the young minds of Gazans, in so much as, you know, they're in any kind of institution which has any bearing on their formal education. Of course, that's not going to change what the parents do. It's not going to change the impact of the religion in the background and the ideology which underpins so much of the Jew hatred across the whole region. But it's one measure that you can strongly take in order to ensure that you can move forward. I wanted to mention PC, who's just given another super chat. Thank you for your third super chat, PC. Do appreciate it. Who said UNRWA must go, and I think we're all absolutely in agreement with that for sure. So the UNRWA must go. That UNRWA has no place in the future for Gaza.
Luckily, UNRWA is going, hopefully. So that's a good point, a good starting point.
I will believe it when I see it. I mean, it's one foot out the door, but the rest of the international community haven't got on board with that enough to ensure that that's for definite yet, no matter what Israel say at the moment. But yeah, I mean, I like the fact that Israel are making the right noises on it for sure. So, any final thoughts, Mark? Any final thoughts on the whole subject of the future of Gaza and you know what we can realistically expect? I mean, we've talked about a lot of what we would like to see, but you know, baby steps maybe.
Yeah, what I would like to see is Hamas completely surrendered, and the Palestinian people surrender, because that would mean they're embracing civilization, and the fight back to a prosperous society would be much less difficult under an occupation where we have the presence of Hamas still as a competing governmental force, and the presence of these gangs as competing governmental forces. You're going to have to enforce rule of law, as Anders said, by enforcing a monopoly government rule there, and then imposing yourself on the infrastructure so that you can start re-educating and reforming the population, a population that's extremely toxic and will be very resentful of the occupation from the get-go, and have international support for their resentment. So that's a long road back, but like Anders, if they're not going to completely destroy Hamas, there may be no other alternative but to do something like this. And perhaps this all could have been avoided in '67 when they instead of occupying those territories, they simply annexed them into Israel. And all those who wanted to stay could stay. All those who wanted to go could have gone.
Yeah, and certainly the unilateral withdrawal in 2005, that was a massive mistake. Should have been like Israel going in, not because of this crazy idea of the covenant with a ghost, but because you want to impose and protect individual rights. And that's how you spread civilization. That's how you make people prosperous. But Anders, final thought?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything that both you and Mark just said. I just want to add that, you know, fundamental to this whole project is to take out Iran's capacities to influence the region. I think if we were to take out Iran, then you know, Hamas and Hezbollah would basically wither away, because they would not have the support that would keep them going. So that's the only thing I want to add.
And that may be that I don't think that can be done by economic sanctions alone. It has to be done with actual military force.
Absolutely.
Destroy their nuclear capacity. We have to destroy their money-making capacity through taking out their capacity to deliver oil, Apparently, this takes place on a little island that's where they transfer all the stuff. You can
Oh,
completely
it could be done overnight, you know. It's
done overnight. Be done overnight, and then take out their air force and their infrastructure, and let the Iranian people, who seem to be in many respects moving towards a liberalized society, let them take over and commit a revolution, overthrow the mullahs and the religious fanatics, and push them into the dustbin of history where they belong.
yeah,
Yeah.
and hopefully they will move in a pro-freedom direction. But even if they don't, even if there is another strongman taking over, more of a secular ruler or something, that's still a lot better than what we have in place today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so where can people find your work, Anders?
Well, it's the giving time of the year, so please pick up a copy for your friends and relatives of Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right. You find it anywhere Amazon is available.
Excellent.
And you can find me on Substack, andersingemarsson.substack.com.
And the same question to you, Mark.
Well, if you go to Mark R. Pellegrino on Twitter, you'll see in my profile the AmericanCapitalistParty.org. We are up and running. We're filed with the IRS. We are vetting candidates now. We've got one candidate we're vetting in Colorado. We are moving forward. Go on there, read the platforms. I've co-written the platform, the entire platform and policies. And if you like them, please donate, become a member, and let's get the only party that stands for individual rights off the ground, so that the people have a real alternative to left and right. They have the right or wrong, and we are the right side. So definitely support us. We're going to be at LibertyCon February 6th to the 9th in Washington, D.C., pimping our wares. So we have a merch store too. So make sure you go in there, buy stuff, and wear the moniker proudly. Carry your American Capitalist Party card proudly. Unfortunately, you guys overseas can only donate a limited amount according to FEC rules. But if you want to donate some, donate the maximum amount and help this very noble venture move forward.
Brilliant. And you can also check out the sister channel to ARCUK, the Briefly Objective, where you're gonna find short videos and very short videos that you can share on your social media platforms, comment and like and all this kind of stuff. Thank you, guys. It's been a great, very interesting discussion.
Thank you to our super chatters as well, all of you. And of course, this channel will be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective. So we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.